босцоо миний дарлагдсан өвөр Монгол босцоо миний торлогдсон өвөр Монгол босцоо миний малагдсан өвөр Монгол яснаа уухай бидний дуудаж байгаа босцоо миний дарлагдсан өвөр Монгол босцоо миний торлогдсон өвөр Монгол босцоо миний малагдсан өвөр Монгол яснаа уухай бидний дуудаж байгаа босцоо.
This webcast is about the human rights of the Mongolian people living under the rule of the Chinese Communist Party. The artificial division of Mongolia and the Mongolian people last century created, according to Chinese authorities, Inner and Outer Mongolia. The Mongolian Republic is now a free and independent state and has cast off the yoke of Soviet oppression. Southern Mongolia, as it should be known, has continued to suffer under Chinese rule for over 60 years. The Chinese government, using official laws, regulations, and policies enforced with the full weight of their military, continues to restrict and combat the linguistic and cultural identity of the Mongolian people under their rule. Cultural genocide, as a means to assimilate non-Chinese minorities, is being waged against Mongols, as well as Uyghurs, Tibetans, and other minority peoples. The Topics in Southern Mongolian Human Rights webcast is about the violation of human rights supposedly granted by the Constitution of the People's Republic of China and the UN Declaration of Human Rights, to which the government of China is a signatory. This isn't about special rights. This is about the human rights and dignity that every human deserves.
Hello, and welcome to our broadcast on Topics in Southern Mongolian Human Rights, Thursday, April 19th, 2012. This week, we want to raise awareness about the situation in Namen Banner in southern Mongolia and provide a small amount of information on the situation of Miss Huchinhu. On April 2nd, in Tuligacha, a village in the Namen Banner in southern Mongolia, hundreds of peaceful Mongolian protesters were brutalized by heavily armed police from the Namen Banner Public Security Bureau. The demonstrators were attempting to prevent the expropriation of their land by a government-backed forestry company named Jinglong Forestry. Specifically, the demonstrators, who also include the previous owners of the land, attempted to stop Jinglao Forestry bulldozers from tilling the farmland. According to the demonstrators, for the past year, Jinglao Forestry has neglected management of the land and the people want it back. These demonstrations are just the latest in a year-long effort to gain back their ancestral lands. Earlier, representatives were sent to Beijing to address their grievances, but they were retrieved by the Namen Banner security forces and threatened with arrest and imprisonment if they continued. In clashes with police, 5 of the demonstrators were seriously injured by the Namen Banner Public Security Bureau. These 5 and 17 others were arrested. Eyewitnesses claim that public security police beat prisoners with batons so that they were bleeding, and others were beaten down to the ground. The reporters also state that women were pulled by their hair and thrown into police vehicles. The next day, more than 40 Mongols continued the protest, despite the previous harsh response from the Namen Banner Public Security Bureau. They chanted slogans and held up a banner that read, "Stop illegal detention, release detainees, and return our land," in front of the Banner government building. Meanwhile, family members of the detained were told some very disturbing news. There were reports that the detainees had unknown chemical compounds sprayed into their mouths after they were handcuffed and thrown into police vehicles. 4 more people were admitted to the hospital after they were interrogated following their arrest by the Namen Public Security Bureau, and all the detainees were said to have been beaten. Later in the evening, the Namen Banner government met with representatives of the protesters. Government officials, attempting to quiet the whole issue, promised to release the detainees if everyone goes home quietly and signs a paper that there will be no more protest over the land. The offer was refused with the following statement: "We are determined not to halt our protest until the government releases all detainees, compensates for losses, and punishes those who beat the protesters, and returns our land to us." This was sent to the Southern Mongolian Human Rights Information Center via text message. After another day of protest demonstrations, the news reports by the Southern Mongolian Human Rights Information Center appearing in Western media, the Namen Banner government, recoiling from the bad publicity, has released the 22 detainees. This gracious act was decreed by the deputy governor of Tonglio municipality while on a visit to Tuligacha with 20 other officials from the Namen Banner government. Mr. Sun, the Tonglio deputy governor, has promised to punish those who have beaten and tortured the protesters and detainees. Commentary could fill volumes on that last sentence, so let me repeat it. Mr. Sun, the Tonglio deputy governor, has promised to punish those who have been beaten and tortured the protesters and detainees. The downside to the events in Tuligacha is that the whistleblowers were subject to the scrutiny previously reserved for the demonstrators. For over a year, the people in the village of Tuligacha, some 300 folks, had stood up to the government-backed business that they believe has illegally appropriated their land. This is not an isolated accusation by any means. Some of this gacha have journeyed to Beijing and been returned in custody. Some have appealed to the government and were silenced in a most brutal manner. As these souls who risk detention and torture to bring the news to the world have communicated to the Southern Mongolian Human Rights Information Center, blocking information and isolating the village from the outside world seems to be the top priority of the officials. A college student from Tuligacha who asked to remain anonymous said in an email communication, "They are, on the one hand, trying to punish those who put the word out about the protest in the village to foreign news media. On the other hand, the officials are deploying state security agents in each household to prevent any further information leaking to outsiders." Of course, the real focus of the investigation should center on allegations of illegally appropriating the people's lands and bringing justice for the violence perpetrated on the peaceful demonstrators. But the Namen Banner officials have the attitude that if nobody knew, there was no problem. So their attitude shows contempt for human rights and dignity and the malignant display of assumed superiority. We certainly hope that the Deputy Governor soon comes through with his promise to hold the guilty parties responsible. Otherwise, he is complicit with those who beat, arrested, and tortured innocent and peaceful citizens. But equally important, the central government bears responsibility for turning a blind eye to the illegal appropriation of lands throughout southern Mongolia, with little consideration in the needs of the people whose economic and social lifelines depend on the land. We call on the Chinese government to take steps to give appropriate and humane avenues for the aggrieved, to have some measure of justice and to have their voices heard in a fair and equitable forum. In our spotlight on the Southern Mongolian defenders of human rights, we want to highlight the case of Ms. Hu Chinhu. The following report, courtesy of New Tang Dynasty News, is from October 2011.
A human rights organization is releasing photos detailing the abuse one activist in Inner Mongolia suffered at the hands of the Chinese regime. The activist hasn't been seen since January 27th, but the photos dated July 22nd to 30th show evidence of beatings endured in secret detention. Some of the following images may be disturbing.
New photos show the abuse suffered by a Mongolian rights activist at the hands of local authorities in China's Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region. The woman, Hu Chinhu Goverund, is a well-known dissident writer. The Chinese regime banned her books for what they called, quote, posting separatist content. Hu Chinhu disappeared on January 27th. Rights organization, the Southern Mongolian Human Rights Information Center, recently released the photos and information about her condition. The organization says she's being held at an undisclosed location in Inner Mongolia's Tongliao city and is being subject to frequent harassment and beatings. This is because of her activism and membership to an organization the Chinese regime has banned, the Southern Mongolian Democratic Alliance. A Mongolian rights activist based in Germany, Shi Haiming, says Hu Chinhu has endured years of harassment.
These past few years, they haven't left her alone. They put her under surveillance. Her phone was tapped. Her internet was cut off, but she didn't surrender. She loathed this government control and didn't cooperate.
The leader of the Southern Mongolian Democratic Alliance, Hada, has been imprisoned for 15 years and is still in jail, although his sentence ended last year. Hu Chinhu was briefly detained and then put under house arrest in late 2010 for rallying for Hada's release. Rights activists say the situation is similar for anyone who fights for human rights in Inner Mongolia.
This is our human rights situation. The risks are extremely great. There are human rights activists here who have vanished without a trace. They're nowhere to be found. They're all legal activists.
Hu Chinhu is a single mother who is being treated for breast cancer. She had fought for human rights in Inner Mongolia for the last 2 decades.
A human rights
The situation remains the same as when the video was released in October 2011. In order to silence Ms. Hu Chinhu, the Chinese government continues to keep her in detention. Her only crime? To stand up for the basic human rights and dignity of the people in Southern Mongolia. Please take the time to visit our sample letter page to find out how to contact your U.S. elected officials and ask for the U.S. government to raise the continued detention of Ms. Hu Chinhu and ask the People's Republic of China. The URL is http://smhric.tv/sample letter/. Thank you for joining us.